Assalamu alaikum students, welcome back to ENG503. This is your Prose 2 subject, and in the last lecture we discussed the story of the good little boy. This time we're going to be discussing the story of the bad little boy. The writer, as in the previous case, is Mark Twain, and you know that Mark Twain was not his real name. His real name was Samuel Clemens. And he's one of the foremost short story writers. He has written a lot about the Mississippi Delta. He's written 2 books for young boys, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, and the other one is Huckleberry Finn. And whenever you have time, I'd like you to go through these 2 books. They may appear to have been written for young boys, but some of the ideas that Mark Twain gives us are really very, very unique, in the sense that he creates humor by using small, simple, ironic statements and structures. Mark Twain, as I just said, is one of the foremost short story writers, and contrary to what you might be thinking, he's not an Englishman as such. You know that the form of the short story originated in England, but for a very long time there was not much work that was being done in England as far as the short story was concerned. And you also know the fact that it is on the continent that a lot of the work was being done, and it is across the ocean in the United States that the genre of short story actually captured the fancy of not just the writers but also the readers of the time, because the short story, as you know, is distinctive in the sense that it is a narrative that you can read in one sitting. You don't need to be reading it for weeks on end, and that is one of the main attractions. And because the 19th and the 20th century saw a lot of progress as far as industrialization and mechanization is concerned, therefore there was a great demand for short story writers and short story writing, because a lot of these short stories, like the essays, were published in newspapers and magazines, and in fact they served to enhance the circulation of the newspapers or the magazines, because if people didn't buy the newspaper or magazine for the news items, they would buy it for these short stories that were being published. So Twain, being an American, is writing for an audience that is not just American, but that by now, by the time that he writes it, which is in the second half of the 19th century, you have a readership that is spread across continents. It's not limited to that particular area. So in the last short story that we discussed, Twain focused on how Jacob Blivens, who was a good little boy, had one ambition only, and that was to be a part of the Sunday school books, the books that were taught with a view to improving the character and temperament of young boys. And you also know by now that the point that Mark Twain was trying to make in that short story was that reality is very different from what is portrayed in books. In The Good Little Boy, Jacob Blivens read about good boys, and he believed that in order to figure in a Sunday school book, you would have to be dead, because somehow or the other it was only about dead boys that the book was talking. Let us see what we have in the story of the bad little boy. But whenever you read this, and the time that you spent in going through this with me, I want you to keep in mind the text of the previous story also, that is the story of the good little boy, because I'm going to be making comparisons throughout the lecture with the story of the good little boy. Okay, so let's see what Mark Twain has for us in the story of the bad little boy. It says, once there was a bad little boy whose name was Jim. And what was the name of the good little boy? Yes, Jacob Blivens. So the bad little boy was called Jim. And Mark Twain says that somehow bad little boys are always called either James or something very similar to that. And he again gives the reference of your Sunday school books. And he's going to continue referring to the Sunday school books, because Twain is working on what you would call a stereotype that has been established in our society, in Western society, in American society, and a stereotype which he is trying to change, and which he says has been established for us by the Sunday school books, because all the books that young boys seem to be reading are the Sunday school books. They don't appear to be any other texts available for them. So it was strange, but still it was true that this one was called Jim. So it's not that it's a fictitious name, and Twain in the very beginning says that this is not a made-up name, this is a name that actually figured, and this little boy was actually called James, and of course it was shortened to Jim. He didn't have any sick mother either, a sick mother who was pious and had the consumption and would be glad to lie down in the grave and be at rest, but for the strong love she bore her boy and the anxiety she felt that the world might be harsh and cold towards him when she was gone. Again, Twain is talking about stereotypes. In a stereotypical situation in the Sunday school book, the bad little boy will always have a good mother, a pious mother, a mother who is honest, who works very hard, and who really loves her son in spite of the fact that he is a bad little boy. And again, in the stereotype, the mother would be very ill. Now that's the stereotypical presence of the bad little boy's mother. The way that the situation is described in books is that this mother would have consumption, would have tuberculosis or some such disease which wastes away the body. But he says, contrary to the stereotype, this bad little boy's mother was not pious and she was not on her deathbed. Most bad boys in the Sunday books are named James and have sick mothers who teach them to say, "Now I lay me down." This is a reference to hymns and songs that were sung. And in the stereotypical situation, in a bookish situation, the mother would be singing that song to her little boy to put him to sleep. And once the boy is asleep, the mother would kneel down by the bedside, weep and pray for forgiveness for her boy because she loves him so much. But, and then you come to the next slide, Twain says, it was different with this fellow. So with the first sentence of the paragraph, you know that there's something being discussed here which has not been discussed. So he says, it was different with this fellow. He was named Jim, but there was nothing wrong with his mother. No consumption, nothing of the kind. She was rather stout than otherwise. Remember, in the stereotypical situation, the mother is wasting away with disease. She's dying, she's thin, she coughs a lot because she has tuberculosis. And Twain starts off by attacking that stereotype. In a stereotype, in a story, in a biblical book, the mother is always pious, the mother is always very weak from being ill. But here, there's a totally different situation. The mother is not pious, and she didn't worry about Jim because she knew Jim would survive. She said if he were to break his neck, it wouldn't be much loss. So she didn't really love him, or she didn't want to show his love. She always spanked Jim to sleep. Remember, in the stereotype, the mother would kiss the boy before he went off to sleep. And she never kissed him goodnight. So Jim's mother never kissed him goodnight. On the contrary, she boxed his ears when she was ready to leave him. So I think Twain is going a little too far in saying that every day the mother would come and she would try to put him to sleep and box his ears and say, okay, now you go off to sleep. So you don't have a mother who shows her love or who is pious and who is very weak. You have a strong, stout woman, and she is fully equal to whatever it is that Jim may come up with. She's not scared for him. She doesn't worry that when she's no more, there will be no one to take care of Jim. She just leaves it up to Jim totally. Once, this little boy stole the key of the pantry and slipped in there and helped himself to some jam and filled up the vessel with tar. You know what tar is? Yes, that black gooey stuff, sticky stuff that they put on the roads. So what he did is he ate all the jam and he filled up this bottle with tar, which sort of resembled the original jam. And he did it so that his mother would know. You know, he took jam, he ate it up, and then he was afraid that his mother would scold him, that his mother would beat him up. Remember, his mother is stout. His mother is strong physically. So he fills it up with tar. And when he's doing it, there is no time at which he feels guilt. He never feels that he is doing wrong. He knows what he's doing. He knows why he's doing it. So he just goes ahead and does it. Now, you remember the stereotype of the bad little boy? The mother is ill, the mother is weak, the mother loves him, the mother shows her love for him. You don't have anything of the sort here. And he doesn't feel any guilt. He doesn't feel at any time that he's doing something wrong. He just knows that this is what he wants to do, so he goes ahead and does it. Where do bad little boys go who gobble up their kind, good mother's jam? That's a question that Twain sort of throws in the air, and he says there was no time at which Jim sort of thought that he would have to answer to his mother. There was no time at which he felt guilt or he felt bad that he was doing something wrong. He didn't think I was doing anything wrong. All that he knew was he wanted the jam, he took the jam, and then he filled it up with tar. That's it. End of the story. Now, in the Sunday school books, even if a bad little boy did this kind of a thing, there would be a time when he would kneel down all alone and promise never to be wicked again. And in this situation, you would see the bad little boy getting up and feeling like he's a new person altogether, because he has prayed, he has begged for forgiveness, he has been forgiven, and therefore he comes out a new individual altogether, and who then goes and tells his mother that I promise I will never do this again. I stole that jam because I was hungry, or because I liked it so much, or because you make it so well. So none of these things he is going to say or do, and he's not going to have that mother being feeling blessed and feeling that the prodigal son has come back and that he has realized what he did wrong. So all this happens in books. What happens in real life is what Twain is going to be discussing here. So he ate that jam and said it was bully in his sinful, vulgar way. So it was something that he liked. He put in the tar, and that was bully also. And he laughed and observed that the old woman would get up and snort when she found it out, and when she did find it out, he denied knowing anything about it, and she whipped him severely, and he did the crying himself. So everything about this boy is strange. It's not like you've been presented in the Sunday school books. He's a bad boy, but that doesn't mean that his mother is good. She is very strict, she's harsh almost, and nowhere do you see any signs of her piety or her honesty. She doesn't show her love for her son. If he does something that annoys her, she just boxes his ears, and she probably says, now shut up and sit down. So a very different kind of mother-child relationship from the one that is described in the Sunday school books. So that tar incident is one. Once he climbed up in Farmer Acorn's apple tree to steal apples, and the limb didn't break, and he didn't fall and break his arm and get torn by the farmer's great dog, and then languish on a sick bed for weeks and repent and become good. Oh no, he stole as many apples as he wanted, he came down all right, and he was all ready for the dog. And how was he ready? He knocked him endways with a brick when he came to tear him. So this is how Twain represents the bad little boy. So what happens is that he climbs up into a tree to steal apples. Now, in a Sunday school book, the bad little boy would have fallen. He doesn't fall. In a Sunday school book, the bad little boy, when he got down or when he came down from the tree, if the limb didn't break, if the tree branch didn't break, there would be a dog who would tear him to pieces. But he comes down, he's prepared for the dog, and this is Jim. You know, he's a bad little boy, but he's prepared. So he steals apples, he takes as many as he wants, and when he comes down, he knows there's going to be a dog around. So he has a brick in his hand, and when he sees the dog, he gives him the brick, and that is it. The dog ceases to be a threat to him. It was very strange, says Mark Twain. Nothing like it ever happened in those mild little books with marbled backs and with pictures in them of men with swallow-tailed coats and bell-crowned hats and pantaloons that are short in the legs, and women with the waists of their dresses under their arms and no hoops on. Nothing like it in any of the Sunday school books. So Twain says it's very strange. The kind of boy that Jim was, he should have had some form of punishment. He steals apples, he doesn't fall down, he doesn't break his arm. That's something that is routine in Sunday school books. He steals jam from his own house, from his own mother's jars, and then he fills up the jar with tar. Nothing happens to him. He doesn't feel guilty. He doesn't feel conscious of the fact that he has done wrong, because he does not think that he has done wrong. So nothing like this ever happens. The Sunday school books have pictures of men who are wearing what he calls swallow-tailed coats. You know, those coats that have a sort of tail at the back like a bird, and they have pictures of women, and not the kind of pictures where the women would look very beautiful, but the kind of women who looked religious, not beautiful, but who looked very pious. So that's the kind of picture that you would have in a Sunday school book. And what Jim is doing and what Jim's life is like has nothing to do with the image of the bad boy in a Sunday school book. Then once he stole the teacher's penknife, and when he was afraid it would be found out and he would get whipped, he slipped it under George Wilson's cap. Now George Wilson happened to be poor widow Wilson's son, and he was the good boy, the moral boy. He was the Jacob Blivens of the class. He always obeyed his mother, never told a lie, he was fond of his lessons, and he loved the Sunday school. So all the characteristics of a good little boy, the kind of characteristics that we have already discussed in the previous lecture, where Twain wrote for us the story of the good little boy. There also he had said that the Sunday school book projects the image of a good little boy, which is very different from real life. And in this also he makes reference to the Sunday school books, and he emphasizes the fact that whatever is presented in the Sunday school books is never how it is in real life. So you have this good little boy by the name of George Wilson, and he is son of the widow Wilson, the poor woman who is very honest, very straightforward. So what he did, he stole a knife, a pen knife, that belonged to his teacher, and he knew that he would get whipped, he knew that he would get punished. So what he did was he slipped it under George Wilson's cap, and when the knife dropped from the cap, you know, he does it in such a way George Wilson is a very straightforward and a very simple boy. So what he does is he picks up his hat, he puts the penknife there, and then he puts his hat on top. And of course, because the knife is something that is solid, it slips, it falls. And what did poor George do? He just hung his head and blushed because the penknife was coming from him. Now he knew that he had not taken the penknife, but how was he going to explain it to his teacher? And the teacher also, not keeping in mind George Wilson's previous record, just says, you stole my penknife, because it's from his head that the penknife is falling. And he was just about to beat up George Wilson when something happened which made him change his mind. So when this penknife dropped, George Wilson blushed because it was from his head that the penknife was falling. And the teacher just caught hold of him and he started to beat him up. Now, in a Sunday school book, this would not have happened. In a Sunday school book, when an innocent person is about to get beaten, one person will come up from nowhere. Let's say a justice of the peace, a judge would come up and would say, oh, you know, this boy didn't do it. I was passing and I saw Jim putting that penknife under his cap, and so the proper person to get the thrashing, to get the beating, is Jim and not George Wilson. Now this is how it would happen in a book, but this is not how it happens in real life. In real life, no person comes to stop him. Nobody says, I saw Jim doing this, or I saw George Wilson doing something else at the time that you were talking about. No one, but no one comes to his help. What does happen is that the teacher catches hold of George Wilson and beats him up real good. There is no one who comes to interfere and who says, oh, you are innocent and I'm willing to be a witness and I want you to go home with me and work for me and I'll make you study also and you will still be enrolled in school and it makes no difference that you are poor. Nothing of the kind happens, because this is not a book. This is real life. So what Twain is trying to say here is that life is not as it is presented in the Sunday school book. In the previous lecture also, if you remember, I pointed out that the image of the good little boy does not coincide with the image of the good little boy as it is given in the Sunday school books. And whatever the Sunday school books write about does not happen to the good little boy in that short story, whose name was Jacob Blivens. So in the same way, this story, which is about a bad little boy, does not show the bad little boy getting punishment for what he does. That, he says, is an ideal situation, and whatever this bad little boy does, it makes absolutely no difference to him. He doesn't feel guilty. His mother is not a pious woman, so she doesn't get upset that he's doing this. In fact, she herself is a very hard woman. So it would have happened that way in the books, but didn't happen that way to Jim. Such things don't happen, and even if they do happen, they don't happen to poor little boys like George Wilson. Jim is a bad little boy, and so he goes through life being bad. At no time does he feel guilty. At no time does he feel that he should change his mode of life. There is at no time a reminder to him that he should mend his ways. So he continues through life the way he was as a little boy. So nobody came to stop the teacher from beating up George Wilson, but he says that this happened because this was real life. This is not a storybook situation. So when George Wilson got thrashed for taking that penknife away from the master, from the school teacher, Jim is happy. Now in a Sunday school book, if an innocent person, if an innocent boy is being beaten up, the person who is the cause of that beating or that misery would feel guilty, would feel bad about it. Here it doesn't happen, because when George Wilson gets beaten up, Jim is happy, Jim is satisfied, because nothing is happening to him. He's the one who did wrong, he's the one who's been doing bad things. But the person who gets caught, the person who is penalized, is George Wilson. So at no time does Jim show remorse, at no time does he show any kind of guilt. The strangest thing that ever happened to Jim was the time he went boating on Sunday and didn't get drowned, and that other time when he got caught out in the storm when he was fishing on Sunday and didn't get struck by lightning. So let's take this one at a time. So when he goes fishing or boating, as Twain calls it, nothing happens to him. Again, in a Sunday school book, if a bad little boy went out sailing or went out boating on a Sunday instead of going to church, that little boy would get punished in some way or the other. But what happens here is that nothing happens to him. In a Sunday school book, the bad little boy, if he goes out boating on a Sunday, would most likely get drowned. Nothing of the kind happens to Jim. There was this time when he went out fishing on Sunday, and nothing happened to him. Again, what Twain wants to focus on is that those who go out for fishing or boating or sailing on Sunday instead of going to church, according to the church book, the Sunday school book, there will be some form of punishment, some form of penalty that is imposed on these boys. But what happens here is that nothing happens, there's no penalty, the boy does not get drowned. When he goes fishing, he's not struck by a bolt of lightning, he doesn't die, he comes back as hale and hearty as when he went. And he says, you might look and look all through the Sunday school books from now till next Christmas, and you would never come across anything like this. That is, you can do whatever you want to, because life is not a Sunday school book. A Sunday school book is a book that is written with one objective only, and that is to show young children, to show society that good is rewarded and that evil is always punished. So no punishment for Jim. And Twain says, you would find that all the bad boys who go boating on Sunday invariably get drowned, and all the bad boys who get caught out in storms when they are fishing on Sunday infallibly get struck by lightning. This is the situation in the Sunday school books. Boats with bad boys in them always upset on Sunday, and it always storms when bad boys go fishing on the Sabbath. Now, I explained the concept of the Sabbath to you in the previous lecture, but in case you've forgotten, let me give you a little sort of background to the Sabbath. The seventh day, or Sunday, is the day that, according to the Bible, is declared for rest. Rest from everything, from worldly affairs. And you're supposed to focus on going to church, reading the Bible, and pursuing other activities which are connected with the religion or with the Bible. So a Sunday school book in portraying a bad boy would show that if he goes for fishing, he'd be struck by a bolt of lightning. If he goes boating for just pleasure, then he would definitely get drowned, because it was believed that bad boys always drowned if they went boating or fishing on a Sunday, since that is the day that is declared holy. So not only is it that bad boys would be drowned, but they would also be struck by bolts of lightning, according to the Sunday school books. So what he's trying to explain here is the difference between life as it is portrayed in a Sunday school book and life as it is lived on a day-to-day basis, and fulfilling certain preconditions. So he says that in the Sunday school books, this is how the boys are shown. If they do something wrong, they at once admit that they have been wrong, and they are given the penalty, or etc., etc. But real life is not like that. How this Jim ever escaped is a mystery to me. So Jim doesn't pay any heed to what is being said. This Jim bore a charmed life. You know what a charmed life is? A magic life. The kind of life that nobody and nothing can put an end to. Such a person will cross a road, not get driven over by a car. Such a person would buy expensive things and do everything that that is possible, and yet not be harmed. So he bore a charmed life. Whatever he did wrong, and there was plenty of things that he was doing wrong, nothing happened to him. He was never caught and beaten up. He never got people telling him that he was bad. He knew he was bad, but he wanted to be that way, and there was nothing of the sort of punishments and penalties that a Sunday school book would outline for him. So he even gave the elephant in the menagerie a plug of tobacco. Can you imagine the kind of things he's doing? He is feeding tobacco to an elephant. He goes to the zoo, he gives the elephant a plug of tobacco. You know that raw tobacco is sort of rolled up. And he gives it to the elephant accepts it, takes it, and does not try to beat up Jim. Nobody punishes him, nobody gives him any penalty at all. Everybody and everything accept Jim for who he is, for what he is. One time he was browsing around in the cupboard because he was looking for essence of peppermint. Now, in a Sunday school book, such an incident would result in his taking aqua fortis, something poisonous by mistake, and therefore suffering because he wanted to steal. But nothing of the kind happens to him. He even stole his father's gun, and he went hunting on a Sabbath. On Sunday, no hunting is allowed. But he breaks the rules of the Sabbath. He goes hunting, and nothing happens to him. In a Sunday school book, if he were hunting on a Sabbath, he would accidentally shoot his fingers. But he's an accomplished hunter, and so nothing happens to him. So one after the other, he does so many things, but nothing happens to him. He struck his little sister on the temple with his fist when he was angry, and she didn't linger in pain through long summer days and die with sweet words of forgiveness upon her lips that redouble the anguish of the breaking heart. No, she got over it. So one time he just struck his sister with a fist because he was angry. Now, in a Sunday school book, if a thing like that happened, he would injure his sister grievously, and she would probably have a prolonged illness, during which she would forgive him and say that, I know you didn't mean it, my sweet brother, I forgive you, and then she would die. Now, in a Sunday school book, if that were to happen, the bad little boy would feel sorry, would feel regret at what he had done, and would, from that point onward, become a good little man because his sister had died, but she got over it. He hit her, she got over it, no problem. He ran off and went to sea at last. Remember, Jacob Blivens also wanted to go to the sea. So this bad little boy, he goes to sea. Again, in a Sunday school book, what you'd find is that a bad little boy goes to sea, becomes a successful person, comes back and says, I'm sorry to everyone. But nothing happens like this. He does not go to the sea and feel remorse and regret and start writing letters back home. Nothing of the kind happens. Another thing that would happen in a Sunday school book would be that if such a bad little boy went to sea, he would come back after years and he would find out that the sister that he had struck had died in the meanwhile. His parents would be dead, his friends would be dead, and he would find himself all alone. That's the kind of stereotype that you would find in a Sunday school book. But Twain says nothing like that happened. When he did come home, he was drunk as a piper, and the first thing you know, the day after he lands, he goes to prison. So nothing is the way it is projected in the Sunday school book. The bad little boy, Jim, grows up, he gets married, he raises a big family, and then what he does is, because he's been a bad little boy, he grows up into a bad man, an evil man. So what he does is, one night he takes up an axe and he kills all his family members. He kills his children, he kills his wife, and he becomes rich. There is no time at which he gets any punishment. There is no time at which he's made to feel that he is doing wrong. Whatever he does, he prospers. If he goes to sea, he prospers because he makes a lot of money. He's not like the kind of boy portrayed in the Sunday school books. He comes home and he doesn't come home to find himself alone. He comes home from the sea and he finds that things are much the same, nothing has changed, the same people, the same place. And he even grows up and he gets married. He raises a large family, but then in time, because he was bad, because he was evil, he kills all of them, and nothing happens to him. He does not suffer any remorse, he doesn't feel any regret for what he has done. On the other hand, he does feel that he's done something good. So he kills his family and he becomes wealthy through lying and cheating. And lying and cheating for him are not as they are presented in the Sunday school book. In the Sunday school book, lies and cheating would be presented as something that was mean and low down. Here he cheats, he lies, and he becomes rich, he becomes successful. So nothing bad happens to him, nothing negative happens to him. He is the infernalist, wickedest scoundrel in his native village, and he's universally respected and belongs to the legislature. This is where Twain brings his most important point. So, he kills his family, he lies, he cheats, he's dishonest, and yet he is respected. And Twain, this is where he brings in the climax of the story, and he says that this universally respected man is now a part of the legislative body. He's a judge. He is keeper of the peace. He implements the law of the land. So you see, there never was a bad James in the Sunday school books that had such a streak of luck as this sinful Jim with a charmed life. So what Twain ends with is the fact that this Jim is not like the James of the Sunday school books. The James of the Sunday school books is one who gets punished when he does wrong. is one who feels sorry when he is being wicked or when he is wicked, who is punished and made to realize. The bad boy who is called James in a Sunday school book would feel guilty, would be conscious of the wrong that he is doing or that he has done. Here, the kind of person that you have in real life is one who does everything that is bad, who is wicked, who is dishonest, who is a liar, a cheat, a murderer, a drunkard, and yet he is successful. He is universally respected. The community looks up to him. The community gives him respect, does not treat him like a scoundrel, does not treat him like a wicked man, because this is not the James of the Sunday school book. This is the Jim of real life, where wickedness prospers, where evil has a field day. Nothing happens to this Jim because he's bad, but he bears a charmed life. Now, this is as far as the story goes. Before we break off today, I want to recap the story of the bad little boy, and I want to emphasize the fact that Twain here is targeting Sunday school books. He's targeting organized religion as it is taught and preached in the church. So again and again he makes reference to the Sunday school books. The Sunday school books were actually a collection of books which were compiled so that children who came to church on Sunday got to learn about their religion, got to learn how goodness always prospered, how virtue always prospered. So they were basically instructional books. But the point that Twain is trying to make is that these instructional books talk about characters that are fictitious, that are in the writer's imagination. They do not have anything to do with real life people. And he gives examples of how the characters that are presented are very different from the kind of people that you meet in real life. In real life, evil prospers, wickedness thrives, virtue is not rewarded. Virtue, honesty, sincerity, integrity, trust, truthfulness, all these characteristics end up by making you into an unsuccessful person. And what does make you successful is cheating, lying, dishonesty, wickedness, evil, an inclination towards vice. If you lie to people, if you cheat people, if you steal from people, people will respect you. But if you are good with them, if you treat them with a lot of respect, if you stay on the right path, you are penalized for something that you did not even do. And Twain gives the example of George Wilson in this book. He gives the example of Jacob Blivens in the story of the good little boy. And both these characters Twain presents in a little detail, and he shows that they are good, they're virtuous, and yet they get caught. George Wilson is a very good boy. He likes attending Sunday school. He does not bunk Sunday school. He's fond of reading, he's very regular in school, and yet one fine day Jim just places the school teacher's penknife that he has stolen under George Wilson's cap, and George Wilson is punished because when that penknife falls down, the teacher assumes that George Wilson had stolen it, and George Wilson, poor fellow, is not willing to defend himself, to say anything in his defense. So when he does not say anything in his defense, the teacher assumes that that he was the one who stole the penknife. So he gives him a good beating, he gives him a good thrashing. Jim watches this thrashing. Jim is a witness to it, but he never once says, this was my fault. He never once says, George Wilson is innocent, I'm the guilty one. Nobody sees what is happening, so nobody tries to save George Wilson. What does happen is that the teacher thrashes George Wilson for something that he had never imagined doing. Remember, he didn't steal the penknife. It's Jim who steals the penknife. Jim is the one who does it to everyone. He doesn't even spare his own mother. He steals jam from the house, and then he fills up that jar with tar, knowing that his mother is going to use it. And his mother knows exactly what he's like. She is not pious, as it is said in Sunday school books. She is not dying. She is a very healthy, very physically very strong woman. She doesn't love Jim. She gives him a thrashing every now and then, but then that thrashing does not have the required impact upon Jim. He goes up to the farmer's orchard and he steals apples from there. In a Sunday school book, if a boy is stealing apples, he is sure to fall down and be caught either by the farmer or be attacked by a dog. With Jim, he steals apples, he comes down off the tree, he meets the dog, but it's not that the dog attacks him. Jim is prepared. Jim knows that there is a dog here, and he has a brick in his hand. So when the dog comes towards him, Jim flings that brick, and the dog is no more a threat. So this is not the only thing that Jim does. Jim bunks Sunday school. In a Sunday school book, boys who bunk the Sunday school to go pleasure sailboating or to go fishing, etc., would be penalized, would either drown or be struck by a bolt of lightning. Something would happen. But that does not happen in real life. That's not how real life operates. And so this Jim, in real life, he goes to sea. Now, in a Sunday school book, if a bad boy did go to sea, he would come back and find out that everybody in his family and friends had died in the meanwhile, and that he's all alone. So there would be a lot of guilt, a lot of remorse and regret. Doesn't happen with Jim. It does not happen with Jim because this is real life. This is not a Sunday school book. The same Jim, when he comes back home, because this is real life, he comes home drunk. He doesn't come home feeling sad and lonely and finding everyone dead. He comes home, he's drunk. The next day, he is put in jail. So no homecoming for him. He grows up, he gets married, he cheats, he lies, he steals. He raises a large family. He not only raises a large family, but one fine day, he picks up an axe and he kills all his family members, and yet nothing happens to him. He continues to prosper. He continues to increase his fortune to the extent that he becomes a part of the legislative body. He becomes a part of your system of justice and peace. So nothing happens to him, he does not suffer on any account, and the reason Twain gives is that this is real life. In real life, wickedness prospers, evil prospers, bad people prosper and are respected. Good people are not respected because they are thought of as weak. Good people are always penalized for what they have not done. Things are associated with them which they never could have imagined that they would be involved with. So wickedness is not punished, wickedness is rewarded, virtue, goodness is penalized, because this is not a world that will accept good people, that will accept virtuous people and give them due credit. The blame will be for the good people, but all the credit, all the appreciation, the applause, the rewards will be for the bad people. Now these are strange ideas, but I want you to think for yourself when you go back home. Read the text very carefully and try to see if society as Twain has presented actually exists, or whether society as it is presented in the Sunday school books exists and has an impact on the community. You've been very patient. Thank you very much, and I'll be back again. Allah Hafiz.